Programmet fortsätter nu på Inneklimatarenan som är svensk ventilations- och svensk automations kunskapstorg och mötesplats för inneklimat och energieffektiva fastigheter. Och vi har forskare från Gävle här idag som undrar om vi alltid gör fel. Vilka fel gör vi när det gäller bostadsventilation? Och de som ska berätta om det för oss är Elisabeth Linden här och Alan Kabanshi. Välkomna upp på scenen.
Oj, oj, oj. Så.
Hey, good afternoon. Sorry, I'll take it in English. And today we're going to look at ventilation in residential buildings. Are we doing it wrong? And I'll talk about the research aspect of what's wrong with the concept of ventilation in residential buildings. And my colleague Elizabeth will talk about the methods that we are applying for new concepts that we are developing. So perhaps you are thinking, why residential buildings? It's simply because that is the place where few or very little research has been dedicated to. Much of the work on ventilation is usually dedicated to commercial buildings, and residential buildings are left out. So just to recap on the processes of ventilation, we have the system that works into two process system. We've got the exchange of air in and out of a building. That is, we're looking at the building envelope. And we have the second process, that is distribution of air in the compartments. Much of the attention now is dedicated to the first process, where we are looking at energy efficiency, we are looking at air flow rates, we are looking at the air handling unit. But very little attention is given to distribution methods, except for understanding, like, is this a displacement ventilation system or is this a mixing ventilation system? And more importantly, we are not paying attention to the airflow dynamics that is happening in the building. So for these two processes, the first process, this process, is independent of that one, but that process, the second process, is dependent on the first one. So I think we had a rude awakening to the pitfalls of ventilation systems in residential buildings, and this was highlighted during the corona. And I think most of you would remember that a lot of people got infected with the virus basically in their own homes. And this is because when you have a family member who is infected, the recommendation was to self-isolate, maintain social distance, and always clean your hands, don't touch your face. So we had that. So the recommendation then was given that you need to increase airflow rates and keep social distancing. But that wasn't enough because a lot of people got infected, and they got infected in residential buildings. So what is it that was missed, and what is the relationship that we have between airflow rate and contaminant in the building? So if you look at this curve illustrates the concentration of contaminants in the building against the airflow rates that you have. And as you can see, with low airflow rates, the concentration is high. With high flow rates, the concentration is low. But this relationship is interesting because when you make any small changes within this region, the concentration drops drastically. But if you increase the flow rates, you find that at higher flow rates, when you make any change that you do, there is very small change in concentration. So this shows you that there is a limit on how much the flow rate will influence the conditions in the room. Secondly, there is also another aspect that you have to look at, which is energy. So you increase the flow rates, but it doesn't help so much with the concentration of contaminants. Another aspect that we actually overlook is the aspect of, you've got the ventilation flow rates that you have your balance system, but we are not accounting for the internal flow that is inside the building. So that internal flow causes entrainment, and that entrainment introduces what we call contaminant flooding. So the system will start flowing. So if you have a person who is infected, the ventilation system itself becomes a transportation mechanism to spread the contaminants in other regions of the room or in the room. And here I just have another aspect when you increase, since the recommendation was to increase the airflow rates. So if you can look at what happens when the airflow rates are increased. When you increase the airflow rates, you see that we have stagnation regions that are introduced. And those stagnation regions actually become opportunistic spaces for infection. So if you happen to be in a region where there is a stagnation region, that's where all the contaminants are flooding, and there is a high likelihood that you are going to get infected because there is poor ventilation in that region. So increasing airflow rates is not only it's not a solution, actually. We have to understand the airflow dynamics that are happening in the building. And those airflow dynamics are not accounted for when we are designing residential buildings. So this is just to give an illustration of how we are designing residential buildings. So you see, you have supply airflow rates dedicated to each room, but the exhaust is only put in the kitchen and in the bathroom. And this is for a system where you have a balanced ventilation system. And in other cases, you only have the so-called F system, where you have supply that is dedicated maybe through windows, where you have infiltration coming in, but still the exhaust is placed in the bathroom and also in the kitchen. So if you can imagine what happens if we had one person who is infected, who is located in one room, where do you think the airflow goes? So we are not accounting for these airflow or dynamics in those rooms. And just I have an illustration, hopefully you can follow through, of what happens, because now the airflow dynamics in the room, we can't control them. They are controlled by changes in temperature. So if you have an infected person in the room, the air will come out and it will mix with other points or other regions in the room before it is eventually taken out in the bathroom or in the kitchen. So I don't know if you are able to follow through. If you can just pick one representation of air and just follow it, you see it circulate in the room, go to other regions, it will also circulate in those regions, and eventually it will go to the kitchen where it will be taken out. So, at the University of Gävle, we've got a project that we are dedicating to residential buildings. And this project is ventilation as a strategy to reduce indoor transmission of airborne diseases. So we are developing a new model and a new risk assessment model and new strategies. And the participants, it's myself, Professor Matt Sandberry, and the research engineers, Elizabeth, Mikhail, Dario, and Leif. I deliberately came with Elizabeth because she's the one who is developing methods for the new strategies that we have. So I think she's the best person to talk about them. And when we are looking at ventilation strategies, sadly, people think this is a COVID project, but it's not. It's a project that focuses on indoor air quality with consideration for reducing transmission of infections. And this includes seasonal flu, it could be COVID, all these are accounted for. So we have a new refined model where we are looking at the two concepts that we've introduced called the paging flow rate and also the visitation frequency. The concept is that at a location, the contaminants in that room will recirculate and come back to the same point before it is taken out of the room. So the recirculation is governed by the probability to retain. The probability to retain is what we call the visitation frequency. So the higher the visits that point, the air molecules make to a point, the higher the likelihood of contamination and spread of the infection. And then we've got the paging flow rate, which is the flow rate that is taking away the contaminants and leaving the region or a room for never returning. So with these two concepts, we have seen that the ventilation system is reducing the concentration of contaminants agents, but at the same time, it is also spreading the contaminants. So your ventilation system is helping you not get infected, but it's also exposing you to the infectious agents. So currently there is the risk assessment model, which is you have an infected person in a building, and then you have got a person who's susceptible to the infection. And this is governed by the Wells-Riley model, which actually centers on the ventilation flow rate that you set for the building. But we have introduced a new concept where we are looking at, within the region, there is a transfer probability from within the same room, from the person who is infected to the person who is susceptible to the infection. So that is governed by the visitation frequency. And then we also have the transfer probability between rooms. And that is governed by the paging flow rate. So with these two concepts, we are proposing a new transmission risk infection model, which is governed by both the transfer probability and the paging flow rate. And with this, that means that each ventilation system that you have, if it's a mixing ventilation system, will have its own transfer probability and paging flow rate. If it's a displacement ventilation system, it will also have its own transfer probability and the paging flow rate. So with this concept, we are testing to see how can we reduce the risk of getting infected. So with these concepts, we have to develop new methods. And for those methods, I think I'll leave it up to my colleague Elizabeth to take it up.
Okej, nu går vi över till svenska. Oj. 5? Ja. I det här projektet måste vi ju titta på hur luften rör sig i våra bostäder. Och det är inte så lätt att se luften, är osynlig. Så därför behöver vi metoder för att både visualisera luftens rörelser men också mäta hur den rör sig. Och här på de här bilderna som jag visar har vi lite exempel på hur vi sedan tidigare har jobbat med just de sakerna. Så vi har en lång erfarenhet av att visualisera och mäta luftrörelser. Ska se om jag klarar av att spela den här filmen. Nej. Ja, jag går vidare istället. Det är en film där vi använder såpbubblor som rör sig med luften och jag sitter där och får lov att andas in såpbubblorna. Nästa bild. Ja, vi kommer, en del av våra mätningar kommer ske i ett rum som redan finns hos oss. Det är ett visualiseringsrum med 2 glasväggar och ett glastak och en ljusspalt som vi kan flytta fram och tillbaka för att lysa upp delar av rummet. Om man ska titta på luftburen smitta och hur den sprider sig i en bostad så behöver vi ju också ha en person som sprider det här. Och vi kommer att förenkla det genom att ta fram en docka, modell, mannekin kanske man kan kalla det, som både avger ungefär lika mycket värme som vi människor gör men också andas på samma sätt som vi gör. De 3 teknikerna som vi kommer att jobba med är framförallt då spårgasteknik, particle tracking velocimetry, som jag inte tror finns något svenskt namn på, och slirenteknik. Och jag ska berätta lite mer om dem i detalj. De här teknikerna finns ju redan, men det vi ska göra det är att utveckla dem vidare för våra ändamål. Och spårgasteknik, där kan man ju köra olika metoder med avklingning, men också till exempel att ha en källa och sen mäta i bostaden vilka koncentrationer man får på olika ställen i bostaden. Det man inte kan göra, det är just att mäta de här sakerna som Allan pratar om. Det är lite ny nomenklatur, men jag tänkte jag skulle översätta det. Visitation, min röst, jag ber om ursäkt. Visitation frequency är besöksfrekvens. Och purging flow rate översätts med renande flöde. Och de här sakerna kan vi inte idag mäta med spårgasteknik, men kommer att utveckla. Particle tracking velocimetry är en metod där man använder en ljusspalt som belyser partiklar, såpbubblor eller liknande som rör sig med luften, och sen fotograferar man dem. Och vi har börjat, det här projektet är ju väldigt nytt, men vi har ändå hunnit börja lite och utveckla den utrustning som vi kommer att använda. Och till vänster så har vi våran ljusspalt som nu är uppgraderad till LED-belysning, och vi kan styra den genom att vi kan ha olika frekvens på, så att vi tänder och släcker dem, och noggrannheten är viktig, och där kan man gå ner till en nanosekundnivå. I mitten har vi våran såpbubbelgenerator som vi använder helium till, och till höger är vår första prototyp av en andningsutrustning. Ska vi se. Och det vi vill ha, det är alltså ta bilder där vi ser spår där vi vet tiden på frekvensen på ljuset, och vi vet också hur långt de har rört sig. Med bildanalys kan vi alltså få fram hur luften rör sig. Här har vi dels då då kanske jag inte kan spela den här filmen heller. Nej. Den skulle visa hur man andas in och ut just såpbubblor. Till höger är en liten bild där vi ser hur de här såpbubblorna genererar spår på bilderna. Och beror på hastighet och hur de ser ut. Här har vi när vi ska ta fram en sån här andningsmetod så behöver vi också veta hur ser det ut verkligen när vi andas. Och det finns en teknik som heter SLIR, en teknik som vi har utvecklat, eller vi har inte utvecklat den, vi har byggt en sån utrustning i Högskolan i Gävle. Och det här är den absolut första filmen, och det man kan se om man kör den här filmen, det är hur luften ser ut när man andas. Och det gör man genom att skapa skuggor. Ja. Så, och här till vänster ser vi våran utrustning, och till höger en schematisk bild där vi har en lampa som lyser på en spegel, vidare till en annan spegel och sen till en kamera. Och mitt emellan de här två speglarna, om vi får densitetsskillnader på luften, så kommer ljuset att brytas, och vi kommer få en bild på kameran som ger oss skuggor tack vare en litet rakblad som sitter där också. De här metoderna är kanske inte någonting som man kommer använda i allmänhet i ventilationsbranschen, men däremot när man jobbar med forskning är det väldigt viktigt. Alan?
Så, tack så mycket för detta. Jag antar att ni var klara.
Det är en bild. Jag vet inte. Alan, do you want to take the last?
Is there we don't have so much time, so if you like to put any questions to Alan and Elisabeth, you're welcome to do that after this presentation. So thank you very much for showing us this very new things that we don't get so many new results here, and this was not even results, it was what's going to be results.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.